along with the stability and financial security that come with it. We believe that everyone deserves a stable, safe, comfortable place to call home in the community that they love. Every year, first under McGuinty, Wynne and Del Duca's Liberals, then under Doug Ford's Conservatives, Ontario's housing crisis has gotten worse and worse. People have been priced out of the neighborhoods that they love, forced to move away from family, away from the place where they grew up. Well, no more. Ontarians deserve so much better, and I know that together we can do better. Today I'm releasing the Homes You Can Afford plan. So no matter where you live, your age, your identity, or ability, no matter what your financial situation is, you deserve a good, safe, secure place to call home. A home you can afford. For you, for your family, for the next generation. This is a plan that offers hope. Together, we can make it happen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Faisal Hassan, your NDP MPP for York South-Weston, official opposition critic for youth engagement, and a proud member of NDP Black Caucus.
Hey, I'm Jessica Bell, your NDP MPP for University Rosedale, and we are speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
As we are meeting virtually today to discuss housing in Toronto, we recognize the traditional and territory lands as one way to express appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and honor Indigenous peoples who have been living on, caring for, and defending these lands for thousands of years. Today and every day, we renew our commitment to honor the treaties and work the path of reconciliation as partners and allies of all Indigenous people.
Welcome to our virtual town hall on housing in Toronto, live on Facebook. You can participate by submitting your questions in the Facebook comments section of this video on Andrea's Facebook page or on any of our Toronto NDP MPP's pages. That's Faisal and I, Suze Morrison, Rima Burns-McGowan, Chris Glover, Butila Kapoche, Jill Andrew, Peter Tabbins, Marit Stiles, Dolly Begum, and Tom Rakocevic. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can tonight.
We are proud to be here virtually with all of you today as we come together to talk about our plans to support, protect, and empower people in our communities to find and stay in good, affordable homes during the pandemic, keep the most vulnerable safe, housed, and off the streets during this upcoming winter, and ensure that moving forward, every Ontarian is able to have their human right of housing is met. This means supporting people and families in our communities so you can find and stay in a stable, safe, comfortable home you can afford in the community you love.
And we know right now that Doug Ford and his government are really letting the people of Toronto down. So instead of supporting people as COVID cases continue to surge and the housing and homelessness crisis continues to get worse and worse, this government and Doug Ford has refused to increase desperately needed resources. And these are resources that we need to save lives.
And instead of making it easier for people to stay in their homes, rent a good place they can afford, or buy a home that can accommodate their families, Doug Ford is making things worse by making backroom deals with his developers' friends. It's easier for landlords to throw people out on the streets during a global pandemic in the middle of winter. People in Toronto and in communities all across the province deserve so much better than this. And we know that if we are all together, we can give it to them. That is why we are so proud and excited to be introducing our next speaker.
The vision Andrea has been sharing with Ontarians is a vision for the province where everyone can access the supports and resources they need to live their best life, where every person has someplace good, safe, stable, and affordable to lay their head, where no one is left behind, and where we can expect more from government, not less.
As the leader of the strongest official opposition Ontario has ever seen, is showing the way towards a better future, where the promise of Ontario belongs to all of us, not just those who are wealthy or have an inside track with the government in power. A future where government actually listens to people, steps up to do the hard work of making lives better for Ontarians.
Friends, please help us welcome our friend, the leader of the NDP, and your official opposition, Andrea Horwath. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks very much for that kind introduction to both of you. Jessica Bell, the fantastic MPP for University Rosedale, and Faisal Hassan, the excellent MPP from York South-Weston. I really appreciate that, that amazing introduction, and I want to thank all of the MPPs, in fact, that are on the line with us today and participating in this, this really important event, because it really is about ensuring that people are able to, have an affordable home, able to live in our province and meet their needs, because you really can't do much if you don't have a stable place to live. And we've all come together, I believe, because each of us shares those basic same values. We believe that housing is in fact a human right, and that everybody deserves that safe and stable, comfortable place to call home in the community that they love. A home you can afford, a home that actually meets your needs, that fits your family's needs. But in communities across Toronto and in fact all around Ontario, that's not what folks are facing. Instead, Toronto is in the grip of a relentless pandemic that's made the ongoing housing and homelessness crisis even worse. As COVID-19 cases continue to surge in our province, and particularly as we see what's happening in the Toronto area, shelters are at a capacity. Respite and drop-in centers are stretched to the limit. They're stretched absolutely thin. And the network of folks that are living in encampments just continues growing. And that's just absolutely unacceptable. Ontario's wait list for affordable housing, as folks may know, has grown to more than 185,000 families. 185,000 families on the wait list for affordable housing, and 35% of those folks are seniors. Winter's here, and far too many people have literally nowhere to go. Toronto renters have spent years watching more and more of their paychecks going to rent while living in constant fear of actually losing their homes. People are priced out of the neighborhoods that they love, and they're forced to move away from family, move away from the place where they grew up. Far too many folks are faced time and again by precarious situations, whether that's being stuck in rental units that are run down or even unsafe, being forced to live in cramped conditions, unable to afford a bigger home that can accommodate growing or multi-generational families, being slapped with massive rent increases they simply can't afford, or getting tossed out by a landlord who's going through the motions of a rent eviction. All for the purposes of just jacking up the rent by bringing in a new tenant. And it almost goes without saying that home ownership continues getting further and further out of reach, along with, of course, the financial security and stability that come with it. But as bad as things are right now, we know that the problems didn't start with COVID-19. Finding a good home you can afford has been getting harder and harder for decades. Under Dalton McGuinty, Kathleen Wynne, and Stephen Del Duca, the Liberals had 15 years to make it easier for Ontario families. They chose not to. Instead, they let landlords hike the rent and make it really difficult for the new tenant. So in between tenants, the rents just keep going up, and that's been a problem for a long time here in Ontario. They cut public housing to help pay for corporate tax cuts. They let billionaire speculators snatch up the bulk of properties, forcing Ontario families to compete over what was left. And over just a couple of years, Doug Ford has taken things, of course, from bad to worse by scheming to help his billionaire investors and developer buddies. He canceled rent control on new units. He was busted trying to let developers pave over Ontario's greenbelt 3 times. And now, of course, as we've all seen, he's actually, passed legislation to help those developers really just pillage our environment even further. And throughout the pandemic, he's refused to step up at all. He refuses to invest in resources that will help families and save lives. He canceled the moratorium on evictions. He stands by his government's cuts to mental health and harm reduction services. And all the while, he's sitting on $9.3 billion. In fact, that number is even higher. It's now $12 billion in emergency funds that should be helping Ontarians grapple with the pandemic. And he's even passed a law that makes it easier for landlords to kick tenants out of their homes. Well, no more. I'm here with you tonight, and I'm running for Premier in 2022 with these fantastic MPPs because Ontario deserves so much better. And I know that together we can absolutely do better. And that's why I recently released my Homes You Can Afford plan, which is on the internet. And I invite you to go onto the NDP website to have a look at it in detail, because it is a detailed plan and it's a platform commitment that takes on rent gouging and rent evictions in Toronto and helps families to find a good, stable place they can afford, to help find families facing sky-high prices find and stay in good, stable rentals that they can afford. We're going to help 311,000 households across Ontario pay the rent with direct financial supports, apply rent control to all units, and put in place a series of updated protections to stop bad apple landlords from taking advantage of renters and protect all tenants from unfair rent hikes. We're going to license and regulate the short-term rentals that are driving up prices by taking units out of the long-term housing supply. And for families who would like to buy their first home in the community they love, but find themselves priced out of the market, no matter how much they work and save, My Home in Ontario program will help by sharing the cost of the down payment with you. And we're going to make it easier for homeowners to create basement apartments, laneway houses, and granny flats with a new Residents' Rights Act that will increase the supply of rental homes people can afford and help a lot of families to pay their mortgage. And these are just a few of the ways that an NDP government will ensure that today's Ontarians have the same opportunities that many of our parents and grandparents had. A chance to actually plant roots for your family and watch them grow, no matter where you live, your age, your identity or ability, no matter what your financial situation is, you deserve a good, safe, secure place to call home, a home you can afford. For you, for your family, for the next generation, this is a plan that offers hope. And I am absolutely thrilled to be talking about it with you today on Facebook. It is a plan that offers hope. It's a plan for the next generation. So together, I'm positive that we can make this happen. Thanks very much for your kind attention. And now we'll get on to the rest of the conversation tonight.
Thank you, Andrea. And now time to introduce my colleague, Chris Glover, Member Provincial Parliament for Spadina Fort York, Official Opposition Critic for Colleges and Universities, and Butila Kabroche, Member Provincial Parliament for Parkdale High Park.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Faisal, and thank you, Andrea and Jessica. I'm so glad that the NDP is focusing on housing, because affordable housing, second only to the pandemic, is the biggest issue in my riding. People with one-bedroom condos or one-bedroom apartments renting for well over $2,000 a month, people simply cannot afford to rent anymore. And as well as that, we've got a homelessness crisis that's focused in the downtown core, but in my riding, we've got encampments in almost all of our parks. Last night, there was a fire, a devastating fire in the Lamport Stadium encampment. And luckily there was security there. They got the people out of the tent. But that we have people living in tents in 2020 in Toronto is just appalling. It doesn't have to be this way. And that's why we've got to build affordable housing. We need to build supportive housing for people with mental health issues and with addictions who need supportive housing. And we also need to build other forms of affordable housing. And I'm also glad in the plan that we're talking about cooperative housing. The last time cooperative housing was built in Ontario was when the NDP was last in power. So we absolutely need to, and the beauty of cooperative housing, for people who are not familiar with it, I encourage you to look into it. It's multi-income housing. So you have people paying full market rent, and you have people who are subsidized. You have old people, you have seniors, you have young people. It's a really wonderful, they form wonderful communities. So I want to thank the NDP for, and I'm proud to be part of this housing plan that's being unveiled tonight. Oh.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to share a bit about what's happening in Parkdale High Park. In our riding, almost 60% of residents are tenants, so housing and tenancy issues are always top of mind issues. Pre-COVID, we already were facing a housing crisis, and so with COVID, it's become so much worse. And instead of providing relief and support for tenants like the NDP proposed, Doug Ford ran through with his eviction bill. And we're seeing that play out right now at the Landlord and Tenant Board, where mass evictions are happening. Hearings are going ahead without tenants present. Even if the tenant is present, they're being forced into unfair repayment agreement plans, where if you are a day late or a dollar short, you are going to be evicted without any hearing. And so there's a lot of organizing that's happening in Parkdale High Park. I'm so proud of that. It's one of the things that really keeps me going and gives me hope. And, for myself individually as well, and our team, in my office, whether it's calling landlords ourselves to stop evictions from happening, whether it's raising issues directly with landlords, attending landlord and tenant board meetings, there's a lot of work that we're trying to do to keep people housed. And we also hosted a virtual tenant workshop because of all of the new changes that Doug Ford made to help landlords and to make it easier to evict tenants. We want to ensure that tenants know their rights and know how to organize. And that work was done together with advocacy, housing advocacy groups and community legal clinics. And, at the end of the day, tenants shouldn't have to fight their own government just to stay housed. And sad reality is that that's what's happening right now, is the government is mass evicting tenants. And so we need a plan that we need a government that guarantees housing for all. And the Ontario NDP housing plan proposes to do that and more, which is why I'm so proud of this plan. And I really, really look forward to implementing it when we form government in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Butella, for giving us updates. For those of you that are listening on Facebook, I do encourage you to post some questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. I have two right now for Andrea, and I'll read both of them. The first one is from Nancy, and her question is, there needs to be rent caps. Does your plan address this? The second question is from Donald, and Donald says, I am on ODSP waiting for housing. I've often found myself in unsafe and dangerous housing situations due to the cost of rent. How can the province help people like me find housing? Over to you, Andrea.
Jessica, and thank you both for those questions. And I'm going to take the first one first, which is the issue of rent caps. And so what our plan does is actually bring back full rent control back to Ontario. Full rent control, which is literally, prevents landlords from increasing the rent, except for a very kind of reasonable annual increase that's basically just inflationary. And we used to have in Ontario full rent controls that kept rents reasonable for all tenants. So not just tenants that live in certain units that were built at a certain time, not just tenants who are like sitting tenants. As you know, you may know right now, when you have a vacant unit, the landlord can charge anything they want. And that's one of the incentives that has created the landlord's desire to, to claim that they're going to renovate and kick tenants out, only to then have new tenants come in, not do the renovations, but jack up the rents by, like, literally in some cases more than $1,000. I mean, those are the stories that people like Butilla and Jessica and others have been sharing with with me and with our team. And so it's not a matter of rent caps. There will be years when things are tight and when rents will not be going up. But what we are going to make sure is that we have rent controls that apply to every unit, and so that every tenant can feel secure and not feel that they are they're just on the edge waiting for the landlord to to provide them a notice of eviction, or to try to jack up their rent through bogus applications for above the guideline increases, for example. And so for too many years now, we have not had a rental situation in Ontario that's been at all fair. It's all been in the favor of landlords. That's the way the Liberals liked it. That's obviously the way the Conservatives like it. But we don't think that that's the way to ensure that people have dignity and quality of housing in our province. And so the other question on the ODSP issue, I mean, one of the things that's in our plan is the building of new affordable housing units. I mean, something that hasn't happened in decades in Ontario. And we're literally going to spend $430 million each and every year for 10 years to build more affordable housing units. And our commitment is that many of those or at least a good portion of those are going to be accessible units. We're going to have universal design standards that make sure that we can house people with all kinds of different abilities, and we're going to make sure that not only that, but that a number of the units that we provide, that we build as affordable housing units, are going to include supportive supports, like supportive services to help people, to help people maintain their housing and stay housed and build a good life. And so absolutely, if it's bad, the situation for tenants is bad, but the situation for tenants who are recipients of Ontario disability supports is it's just horrendous. It's even that much worse. And so we're going to solve that. And if you're not not somebody that desires the chance to live in affordable housing units, then we'll also be providing direct rent subsidies for people to help pay the rent, so that you have a chance at getting that unit that you want in the market, but not having it not having it take all of your monthly check. And so there's a number of different solutions, and that's what I'm really proud of this plan as well, because it really does identify and acknowledge that people should have choice in their housing, whether it's their rental housing or whether it's their home ownership. People deserve to have choice, and right now that is not happening, especially in Toronto. People are desperate, and they are having to make choices and decisions that they shouldn't have to make. And so we're going to take care of all of those things in this plan.
Thank you, Andrea. Butila Koparechi, MPP for Parkdale High Park, is the official opposition critic for mental health and addictions. And now I'll turn to Jill Andrew, Member, Provincial Parliament for Toronto St. Paul's, official opposition critic, culture, women's issues, and a proud member of NDP Black Caucus.
Hello, Faisal. Thank you for that warm introduction. Oh my goodness, housing is a human right and we deserve it. And 67% of our residents here in St. Paul's are tenants. And we are demanding rent relief and rent control, and we're trying to say goodbye to vacancy decontrol. And that's what the NDP housing platform is set to do when we make government in 2022. I am so honored this evening to be able to introduce you to Liza Butcher. Sorry, Liza, for goodness sakes. Liza is one of our most outstanding tenants advocates here. She's been doing this for years. And Liza is the president of the Heath Street West Tenants Association. And I will turn it over to Liza to do what she does best. Thanks for being here, Liza.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'll start. In 2013, our buildings 70, 80, 90 Heath Street West were sold to Hollyburn Properties, a wealthy corporate landlord with approximately 100 multi-residential buildings across Canada. When we got our first above guideline increase notice, we formed the Heath Street West Tenants Association, where I became president. Since Hollyburn Properties became our landlord, we have faced 4 consecutive above guideline increases, with more likely on the way. We have paid for above guideline increases for things including elevators, roofs, light bulbs, heat sensors, garage painting, new garbage chute doors, plumbing, an upgrading to heating and ventilation systems, security, low flush toilets, an accessible entrance, which is not even up to code, and outdoor walkways, which we are being asked to pay for twice. Although we hired one of the best tenant paralegals, Hollyburn's legal team is always able to find loopholes or ways that ensure everything is considered capital costs by the landlord and tenant board. Your strategy says we'll crack down on landlords who exploit loopholes in the law to seek unfair above guideline increases for repairs or renovations that aren't needed. Firstly, how would the NDP differentiate between fair and unfair above guideline increases when you have landlords like Hollyburn who clearly pass on unfair costs because of how the Residential Tenancy Act is written? And they can do so legally. So, and secondly, if the NDP bans above guideline increases, which I believe is necessary, how would the NDP ensure landlords continue to maintain their buildings?
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks, Liza, for the not only for the questions, but for the work that you do on behalf of yourself and your fellow tenants in these properties. One of the things that folks might not know, but I used to be quite the tenant advocate myself back in the day. Before I was elected to Hamilton City Council, I worked for a legal clinic, and a big part of my job was helping tenants to organize and helping to prepare for landlord-tenant board hearings and all of those pieces, and this was a problem then, and that was in the 1990s. Okay, so it's something that has continued to be a problem, and one of the other things, of course, is the quality of the work that then happens. I mean, so many times I've heard tenants say, okay, look, if you're going to do the work, I get it, but then the quality of the work is so subpar, and I don't know if that's why you have to pay for the walkway twice or what, but there's really no checks and balances. And so, I mean, I think one of the first things is it's basically a principle, which is that we actually would listen to tenants and believe them when they come to the tribunal and tell their story. I mean, there's just right now things are so unbalanced. And one of the things I think that we're going to be able to successfully do is really take out some of the incentive, the financial incentive that landlords have to try to squeeze tenants out in the first place. But when it comes to the above the guideline increases, I mean, it's just been such an unfair process for such a very long time. And these loopholes need to be closed. And so our plan is aspirational in that regard. But as you probably have noticed, much of the detail needs to be fleshed out in terms of the specific mechanisms to achieve what we want to achieve. And so when it comes to things like above the guideline increases and balancing them against the necessity of ensuring that tenants have quality housing and don't have to worry about maintenance and repairs that don't get done, or major functions in the building that fall apart, things like elevators, the horror stories we hear about that. I mean, we there has to be an approach that makes sense. And so we know that we have a tribunal that is completely dissolved almost, right? I mean, there aren't enough adjudicators there. There aren't enough people who are attending hearings, and so tenants are getting a short shrift in the first place. But those landlords have deep pockets, and as you say, they know how to work the legislation and work the regulations. And what it's going to be incumbent upon us is to make sure that when we make the changes to the legislation and the regulations, that we're listening to the lived experiences of tenants and you know, closing up those loopholes and making sure that you know, that landlords, you know, bad apple landlords can't you know, can't winnow their way through the loopholes any longer. Those loopholes absolutely have to be closed. And as I mentioned earlier when responding to another question, I mean, the other thing that we want to make sure is that we, you know, that we bring, you know, more modern design codes, building codes to Ontario, to you know, to create a requirement, to create an imperative for the quality of our housing to be upgraded in a way that meets the needs of every tenant that's out there.
Thank you, Andrea. And now I would like to welcome my colleague Rimabon McGowan, Member of Provincial Parliament for Beaches East York, official opposition critic for poverty and homelessness, and a proud member of the NDP Black Caucus, and my colleague Peter Tubbins, Member Provincial Parliament for Toronto Danforth, official opposition critic for energy and climate crisis.
Thank you so very much, Faisal. And thank you very much. This is just such an important town hall. It's an absolute privilege to be here. And I want to just paint a little bit of a picture of what's going on in Beaches East York. This is a very socioeconomically diverse part of Toronto, and we need this plan so desperately at all the various parts of it. And I think that the key is what Andrea was just saying, that this plan listens to people. It listens to people who want to buy houses. It listens to tenants. It really has in mind why they are in such distress. So why it is that people who grew up in Beaches and East York can't afford to buy homes where they grew up, and why it is that tenants are in such distress. They're in particular distress now because of the COVID epidemic and the fact that people are actually in the process of being tossed out of their housing or in danger of it. But those problems come from the deep systemic issues that Andrea has been talking about. And what I love about this plan is that it not only addresses the distress and the emergency of what's happening now, but it goes deeper and it says, let's actually deal with those deep systemic issues. Let's deal with the housing stock. Let's deal with why it is that we have these emergencies. So I think it's just such an important plan, and I'm really looking forward to the time when Andrea becomes premier and we as an amazing NDP caucus can actually make these things happen. A lot of my time right now is spent trying to keep people housed. And I want to say kudos to the incredible tenants union in East York that's been coming together to keep the East York 50 housed, and actually going up against the landlord tenant board to make sure that their cases are heard. And I think the tragedy there, as I've been sitting in as a witness and helping, is to see how so often people don't even get a chance to make their cases. So it is serving as an eviction factory. And you've heard about the homelessness crisis that Andrea and Chris were describing. That's the horror of it, that we are busy tossing people onto the street where there's nowhere for them to go. And it's so much more expensive to house people or try to shelter them in a shelter system than it is to keep them housed. So I'm really thrilled with this plan, and I'm very excited to be a part of putting it together. Thank you so much. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Rima, and thanks, Faisal, for your introduction earlier. Many of my colleagues have talked about the larger picture of the fight that tenants are engaged in and the difficulties that they're facing with AGIs, above guideline increases, and this drive to evict. But I want to talk a bit about rent evictions. About half of the residents in my riding are tenants. We have quite a few 2, 3, and some 4-story walk-up apartments, buildings that are 50 years old. and they've got residents in them who've lived there for decades. And because of rent controls that were put in place in years when the NDP was able to push for substantial changes, or when we were in power in the early 90s, many of those people now have rents that they can afford even as seniors on a pension. And what we've seen now are speculators, developers coming in, assessing the income potential for those buildings if they can drive everyone out, realizing that they can literally triple the rents. One unit, Queen and Logan, there was a gentleman in his 70s who'd lived there since the 1950s. His rent was $800 a month. When he was given his eviction notice, he checked out the internet and found that his unit that he was currently living in was going to be renting for $2,400. There was no way he was going to be able to stay. And we see this in building after building, where stable working class households are being told, you are being put out, best of luck. And it's a whole process of intimidation, giving people eviction notices that don't have legal standing, harassing them, messing with the maintenance, pushing hard, and in some cases, offering buyout amounts. In one case, I know a tenant who was offered $10,000, took it, and when she went out on the market, realized she couldn't rent anything in Toronto. She had to move to Newmarket to find a basement unit that she could afford. So this whole process of driving low income and middle income people out through rent evictions using the mechanism of vacancy decontrol, which allows a landlord to reset the rent at whatever they can get away with, is something I'm very happy to see is going to be addressed in our housing policy. We have to have this, or we're going to lose thousands and thousands and thousands of units people can afford now, but won't be able to afford in the future. And with that, Faisal, I turn it back to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Peter. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Maris Stiles, Member for Provincial Parliament for Devonport, Official Opposition Critic for Education. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And it is really a pleasure to be here. I am the Member of Provincial Parliament for Devonport and the Education Critic for the Official Opposition. And there's no question, my community is made up of tenants, many tenants. As somebody else this evening already mentioned, tenants, in our communities should not have to fight their own government to stay housed. But that's what we see happening time and time again. And that's why I'm so excited about our housing plan, because once we kick Doug Ford out in 2022, we have an opportunity to really change things in this province. Look, I deal with, as an MPP in my office, and so many of my colleagues here tonight, we deal with these issues daily. We're calling landlords directly. We're talking with tenants, and there's so much work happening on the ground. And I want to actually also acknowledge the incredible work that tenants are doing in organizing to push back. But for decades now, they haven't had a government that was working with them and listening to them. And that's the opportunity we have in about a year and a half. In Devonport, tenants have been organizing, and that is how I met Amy, who's going to join us now. And I know she has an important question for Andrea. Amy lived in Little Portugal and was rent-evicted, which is something we've heard about tonight quite a bit. In 2019, there was very little, almost nothing that she could do to stop it, even though she put a lot of effort into trying to do so. And we've had a lot of very high profile situations like this in my community in Devonport, like at 394 Dover Court. Tenants who organized, who fought really hard, but at the end of the day, they just simply don't have a government on their side. Projects like Rent Evictions Mapping Project has brought attention to the struggle that so many in our community are facing, and I want to shout out to them. So it's great to have Amy here to share a little bit of her story, and I know she has some really important questions, and I hope that we can work together to make some really significant change here in Ontario in the next little while. Over to you, Amy.
Wow, Marit, that's so generous and so kind. Thank you so much for having me. I am really, really inspired that these conversations are happening. I know that when I was experiencing rent eviction, I did not feel like there was an empathetic or sympathetic ear at all in terms of anybody who could make any change. So thank you for committing this time to trying to make change. Andrea, my question around rent eviction, it has to do with, so, you know, I've heard you talking about making sure that the housing plan addresses landlords who attempt to evict tenants in bad faith. And I wanted to know, is there anything there that's going to address or prevent residential units from being converted into for other purposes, like, for example, turning apartments into commercial space? I was served an N13 in February 2019 when a landlord took over a 4-unit mixed building in Little Portugal. And when I was served the N13, I was advised by both legal aid and the landlord tenant board that N13s were virtually impossible to fight unless there was proof of bad faith. And usually that only happens after you've already left. So the individual who bought the property that I was living in actually intended to evict all of the tenants in order to make artist studio space. And there was no law that was going to prevent that conversion, even with the tremendous lack of affordable housing and with a crisis building within our communities. There is still no law that protects you from losing your home to make room for an office. Basically, without the burden of proof was quite low on this landlord in order to prove that their intentions were what they were. But to obtain the evidence that they needed in order to do that, they entered my unit illegally over 15 times. And so how does this new plan really address that loophole with N13s and the fact that, you know, landlords are not actually allowed to be pursuing these types of inspections without permission? They still can, and if they do, they'll still get rid of the tenant. So I'm just wondering how you're going to address those. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amy, for first of all telling your story and giving, you know, a sense to for everybody else who's watching to the process that's gone on and what how frustrating that was and how, you know, how powerless that must have made you feel. I mean, that's pretty terrible. And it's when we're talking about your home, right? I mean, I'm so sorry that you must have been so stressful and so horrifying. And so I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I mean, you've touched on a number of pieces that just need to be fixed straight up. You know, we used to have a Rental Housing Protection Act here in the province of Ontario. When the last Conservative government downloaded housing policy pieces to the municipalities, they got rid of the Rental Housing Protection Act. And what that act did was provide a registry of rental units, and you know, it was also which served to help to ensure that there weren't above the guideline increases happening illegally, right? But it also was a kind of a roster of rental units that were in the you know, were in the mix when it comes to what was available across the province in terms of rental housing, so that when, for example, some developer or landlord decided that they were going to, you know, just mow down that housing and build something else, that there would be a way to prevent that from happening. Because of course, as your situation identifies, now, you know, that neighborhood where you lived has lost 4 units of housing. And if we allow that to happen, you know, over and over and over again, you can see how very quickly we would lose rental housing stock, and particularly some of the rental housing stock that was described by Peter, for example, in terms of the housing stock that's affordable. And so, I mean, one of the first things, and I've already mentioned it, we're absolutely gonna scrap the vacancy decontrol. So one of the things that, you know, provides the incentive for landlords to kick tenants out. We are going to stop the unfair rent evictions and the bad faith landlords' own use evictions that are happening. But none of that will mean anything if we change these pieces of legislation and usher in new laws and new regulations if we don't fix the landlord and tenant board. And that needs to be fixed, you know, in in big ways. I mean, there's been a huge delay in filling of vacancies, as I alluded to earlier, at the Landlord Tenant Board. Why? Because Doug Ford doesn't care. Doug Ford and his government don't care about tenants being able to to protect their homes and to fight against unscrupulous landlords. But we do care. So along with changes in legislation, we are going to make sure that we fix the Landlord and Tenant Board. We're going to hire enough competent and impartial adjudicators and stop the delays that prevent Ontario renters right now from getting justice on critical issues, and whether that's critical issues like still allowing a landlord to evict you while they're illegally, while the evidence would show that they 15 times illegally entered your apartment. That looks like bad faith to me. How the adjudicators at the Landlord Tenant Board didn't identify that as a kind of as a red flag, I don't know. But that kind of thing has got to stop. There has to be enough staff, or rather enough adjudicators on the board, and they have to be qualified, and they have to be non-biased. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable how many people are waiting literally months and months and months for their hearings to take place because the backlog is so huge, and that's just not acceptable, and it's preventing tenants from getting the justice that they deserve on everything from poor living conditions to rent evictions, as you describe, and things like racism and discrimination that are rampant as well in the rental housing market. And I mean, if there's one other thing that I think is really clear that shows once again the Ford government's disdain for tenants is the cuts to legal aid and the cuts to the legal clinics, like the places that tenants could always rely on to go get some legal advice, some representation, some support. It's become harder and harder to access that kind of support because the Ford government has been cutting back on legal aid. And so we will be proudly reversing those cuts to legal aid and making sure that tenants have the ability to exercise their rights under the new laws that we'll be putting in place, because again, those laws will be meaningless unless we're providing the supports that will help people to access justice. And so it's I mean, there's just so much that needs to be fixed because for 15 years the Liberals didn't bother, or they took really tepid half measures because their developer friends certainly put pressure on them, and their developer donors and landlord donors, put pressure on them not to bring fairness back into the system. We don't have to worry about that. We are prepared to make the changes necessary, not only in the legislation, but also in the pieces that support that legislation to enable it to be fair to tenants. And so things like the Landlord Tenant Board and things like the legal aid system that we need to shore up. So again, I want to say thank you for raising that scenario and sharing publicly the difficult situation you were put in, and it doesn't have to be happening. And in 2022, when we form government, it'll be on the top of our agenda to fix the mess that's been left by successive Liberal and Conservative governments.
Thank you, Andrea. I would like to now turn and introduce my colleague Suze Morrison, Member Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre, Official Opposition Critic for Tenant Rights, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls Response and Urban Indigenous Issues, and Dolly Begum, Member Provincial Parliament for Scarborough Southwest, Official Opposition Critic, Early Learning and Childcare, and Tom Rakosovich, a member for Humber River Black Creek, Official Opposition Critic, Auto Insurance and Government Services and Consumer Protection. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello. Hi there. My name is Suze Morrison. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre, and I'm also the Official Opposition Critic for Tenants' Rights. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of having a safe, secure place to call home. Families have lost their income, their job, or their business as a result of the pandemic. Here in Toronto, in the heart of the city, where we've entered our second lockdown, many folks have not been able to return to work. As winter nears and shelters in Toronto are at capacity, tenants who are evicted have nowhere to go. The Ford government is forcing people to find shelter, to apartment hunt, to crash with their friends and family, to couch surf, to survive on the street, and it's putting our public health and safety at risk. Yesterday, right before the government adjourned to the legislature for the winter break, my motion that I had tabled to stop COVID evictions was passed unanimously. It's time for Doug Ford to take urgent and immediate action and follow up on that motion and sign the required emergency order to bring this motion into effect so that no more Ontarians are evicted during a pandemic. We need to help Ontarians who are struggling right now, and I see it every single day in my riding here in Toronto Centre. We need to ensure that as a part of our recovery from this pandemic, that we're taking action to ensure that every Ontarian has a place to call home. I'm so proud of the Ontario NDP housing plan, and I know that this is a plan that will help people, will improve lives, will make our cities more affordable, and will help folks find good, stable housing in the communities that they love. So thank you so much for being here with us today. It's just honestly such an important thing to focus on to make sure that we're making good, affordable housing for everyone in our community.
Hi, everyone. This is Dolly Begum, the MPP for Scarborough Southwest, and I am just so excited to join all my Toronto colleagues, as well as our leader, Andrea Horvath, to talk about this amazing housing plan that we have, Homes You Can Afford. There are a few reasons why it's so important for my riding in Scarborough Southwest and across the city, frankly speaking. And I think during this pandemic, we saw how expensive it is just to have a roof on top of your head. When we talked about, when people started getting served, for example, or any sort of benefits, it was not enough to keep up with your rent. And that just goes to show how expensive it is. For folks in Scarborough Southwest, we have been dealing with a lot of evictions. A lot of tenants right now in the middle of a pandemic are getting evicted. The hearings are just dreadful. We also have a lot of folks who have a hard time just dreaming of one day owning a home. So as this is one of the biggest costs and how tough it's been, this plan really addresses some of the key components that we have heard from people. And I just want to highlight how important it is that we came up with a plan that we heard about, the concerns that we heard at the door 2.5 years ago. These were concerns, what people were talking about in terms of the type of homes they want, how easy it is to make sure that we have, things like laneway housing, things like making sure that rent is more affordable, things like making sure that, young folks or young families can one day buy a home. And I think it's a plan that actually gives hope, gives the ability for young people, for new immigrants, new families living across Scarborough Southwest, the ability to dream again. And I'm so proud of it and so excited to join you all. And thank you so much. I'll hand over to Tom.
Thank you so much, Dolly. My name is Tom Rakosovic, and I represent my lifelong home, riding, and community of Humber River Black Creek. It's times like these that I'm so proud to be a New Democrat. The issues that this plan addresses speaks directly to my own family experiences, having lived the first 30 years of my life here as a tenant in Toronto's Northwest End. More than half of my community are tenants, and their lives are only getting harder. As well, this pandemic has only amplified the challenges that struggling families are facing. My community has been one of the hardest hit by COVID-19 because of these socioeconomic determinants of health. We have essential workers packed onto buses at rush hour, multi-generational families having to live in small apartments due to the unaffordability of housing and rising costs of living. Yet this government refuses to help the communities that need it the most. Even worse, under the cover of this pandemic, the Premier's ripping up environmental protections for wealthy developer friends and donors. If only the Premier had this level of interest in helping everyday Ontarians, but we know he never will. Fortunately, there is a plan that will help everyday Ontarians, whether they are tenants or hopeful new home purchasers. Those in my community who have read this plan have told me that it will improve their lives immensely, and it is a source of hope. And for that, I'm so proud to be a New Democrat. I'm looking forward to 2022 when we can improve the lives of people across this province.
Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight, my MPP colleagues and those who provided comments and who watched online. That is the conclusion of our town hall on housing. I'd like to hand it over to Andrea for some final thoughts.
Thanks very much, Jessica. And I want to thank everybody who's participated in this town hall tonight. And I do want to say, just following on Tom's comments, you know, housing is the most, in most cases for people, it's your most expensive bill. You know, your rent or your mortgage it takes up a chunk of your income. And so to make sure that you're able to have housing that meets your needs and still allows you to live a decent life is extremely important. And you'll see that's a principle that's throughout our plan. But I want to start by thanking Jessica and Faisal. Jessica Bell, the MPP for University Rosedale, and Faisal Hassan, the MPP for York South-Weston. Fantastic hosts, and want to say thank you very much to you, as well as to the team of NDP MPPs that participated. MPP Suze Morrison, Toronto Centre, MPP Rima Burns McGowan, Beaches East York, MPP Chris Glover, Spadina Fort York, MPP Butila Carpoche, Parkdale High Park, MPP Jill Andrew, Toronto St. Paul, MPP Peter Tabbins, Toronto Danforth, MPP Marit Stiles, Davenport, MPP Dolly Begum, Scarborough Southwest, and MPP Tom Rakocevic, Humber River Black Creek, and of course the courageous people who told their stories. Liza and Amy, thank you both very much as well. We are determined as New Democrats. I'm so proud to see this group of Toronto MPPs here on this town hall with us tonight. Thank you for participating, and we are determined to keep Doug Ford to one term and to change things in 2022 and make life better for everyday Ontarians, as Tom was saying. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.